The Bardo States and Esoteric Astrology. In many respects, the Bardo traditions and the astro-shamanic traditions are parallel. The person who completes their Saturn return at 30 years of age also finds themselves gradually detaching from the physical, Saturn, and floating off beyond time, wandering in and through a progression of what are called the chakras. They too most often do not know that they are, quote, dead, unquote, in one sense, and they cannot understand why they can't communicate with those around them, those who are among and living now in an area of life now dead to them. This idea that we die and yet don't know that we're dead is common to both approaches, as well as the gradual realization that death has taken place and all that goes with that. Such as, being unable to connect or reach the living, not being able to get back into our own habits or body, hypersensitivity, some kind of remote viewing or out-of-body experiences, and so forth. This is very esoteric stuff, I agree, but that's what this is about. In other words, if you read the Tibetan Book of the Dead or writings on the Bardo, you will find a lot of similarities to the journey through the chakras as described in my book, which is called The Astrology of the Heart, Astro-Shamanism. It includes the dying to one level or chakra in the process of being born or incarnating on yet another. No, these two traditions don't fully dovetail, but it's very clear that they are talking, if not about the same kind of experience, then at least in a similar manner. When I am asked what are the most important resources for the astrologer or for any spiritual person interested in shamanic techniques, some are surprised and disappointed to hear that learning the proper kind of meditation is at the top of the list. It's at the tip-top of the list. So it's almost as if it's somehow unfair or not part of astrology to make such a recommendation, or as if meditation was somehow politically incorrect. So we need to examine this. And in the East, in countries like Tibet, China, Japan, Nepal, Korea, and so on, there are hundreds of types of meditation and words for it. While here in the West, we pretty much have just the one word, meditation, to cover anything to do with the mind and its training. To make matters even worse or more confusing, the most popular concept of meditation in America, perhaps because it's been successful, is that of transcendental meditation, TM. And that is supposed to be some kind of relaxation or stress release therapy, a way for us to cool out and to go deep within ourselves. Meditation is also often associated in people's mind with cults and trance-like states, hippies, and alternative religions in general. So it's anyone's guess what those relatively few who do meditate on a regular basis actually do. Everything from practicing the authentic Eastern methods of mind training to mood therapy, psychedelic music, incense, even lava lamps. It's a fact that there's no general agreement as to what meditation is all about in this country. So is it any wonder that the vast majority of individuals steer clear of meditating entirely? And this is unfortunate, and I'd like to explain why. First, talk about our Western tradition. We also have a long and distinguished philosophical tradition here in the West, but it has one major flaw, which is that in general, that tradition seldom focuses on the mind itself. In other words, we don't use the mind in the West to look at the mind, but rather we use the mind to look at the various contents of the mind. Subject matter like existentialism, mathematics, linguistic analysis, and so on. For example, you are now reading the content of this talk. You're listening to it. Instead of that, please look at who is listening to these words. And take a moment, do it. Direct your mind to look at itself, to look at the looker, who's looking. If you even try it, it's difficult, is it not? This is what meditation and mind training is about. Learning to look at the mind itself. Now, although Western mathematics and philosophy is paying increasing attention to the concept of the observer being part of what's observed and vice versa, these attempts are still maturing. I find it much easier to go to the real experts in using the mind to, in looking at itself, and these are the Tibetans and some of the other Asians. This is part of what the Eastern methods of meditation and mind training are all about. By and large, we don't do this form of mental practice, this kind of meditation here in the West. For centuries, we have been kind of lost in a simple dualism that conceives of a looker and a looked at. And we bought into that dualism, although philosophy and science are gradually coming to accept the concept that the looker affects what's looked at, and that how we look makes a difference. Well, Buddha did this 2,500 years ago. What little we know about looking at the mind itself, we have assimilated from the Eastern philosophical traditions under the very broad term, as mentioned, meditation. And even then, it has a very foreign feel to most people. Mind training of the type that I'm describing here, it's our heritage, it's our mind. Meanwhile, we tend to see it as not a natural part of our culture, but rather something that's come to us from cultures outside our own, in particular from Asian countries. Why do we need it at all? Well, for starters, we need this type of meditation to overcome our own dualistic way of thinking, the one we just spoke of, and to prove to each one of us that the looker in what is looked at are interdependent and not independent of one another. Our most sophisticated scientists, psychologists and philosophers now understand this, but for the most part it's not yet filtered down to the rest of us as a fact of life. In studying the Dharma, we need these meditation or mind practice techniques to help us get beyond the time-oriented, in astrologers we can read Saturn, these time-oriented materialistic techniques that we've inherited from this dualistic way of looking at life, of thinking. And we need to learn more about the timeless or more eternal areas of our own mind. In this area, our religions have failed us. Western religions, by and large, offer the concept of faith to us, but precious little by way of any methodology, methodology of the mind itself, step-by-step practical techniques to work with the mind in order for it to see itself, to look at itself. And we need those techniques, and for all the reasons that I've given above. Asian religion and philosophy, which are themselves more unified than here in the West, abound with techniques and methods of mind training. We just happen to need them at this point in history over here, too.